So good afternoon, we're back. I am so excited to join you guys here for a discussion on leadership and legacy with two fabulous, awesome women that I have the honor to have this conversation with today. We first have Benita Chinn, who is the Senior Director of Manufacturing Capability and Systems with Pepsico North American Beverages. And to my left, we have the wonderful Teri McClure, who serves on public boards and some nonprofit boards, and also retired from UPS as the Chief Human Resources Officer. So welcome, ladies. I've always wanted to know what it was like to be on a talk show. So this is my moment, my opening moment. So let's just kick it off with, I would love each of you just to spend a couple minutes just talking us through your leadership journey overall. Just give them a quick overview of your total leadership journey.
Good. As Dawn mentioned, Benita Chinn. I am the senior director today, but I started out early on as an engineering major, as a maintenance supervisor who was supervising men that were old enough to be my father, and really had a lot of hard lessons of how to navigate. And here I was, this 27-year-old snot-nosed kid out of college, and that was my first lesson in leadership, leading men that I not only needed to supervise, but I also needed to learn from at the same time. And I think it was really the foundation of how I approached new roles as a leader throughout my career, because it was about knowing, your audience, knowing your team, but letting them know that you're also there to learn from them. And that was something I carried on throughout my career, which has been filled with leadership roles, whether it's leading a team or leading a major project initiative, leading transformational work in engineering and manufacturing across our food and beverage company. And so I think those are some of the really key traits that for me, I've kind of taken along the way. And now that I'm in a headquarters role, sector level versus field and operations is a whole nother level of leadership, but my approach is still the same. Yeah. The approach is still knowing the team, getting to know them, and knowing senior leaders to know how I can not only improve things for myself, but improve things for them and for the business. And so I always tell people, hey, it really started out as that maintenance supervisor, my first role out of college.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Teri, would you do us a favor and give us an overview of your career?
Sure. I think my leadership journey was a little different because as an attorney, I was an individual contributor for much of my career, either as an outside attorney before I joined UPS, and then even as joining UPS as a labor and employment attorney for many years, I was an individual contributor. So my leadership had to be through informal leadership. It was the ability to influence and impact when people did not directly report to you. Mm-hmm. Because as lawyers giving advice to an organization, their role is to try to help the organization understand why they need to follow the advice. Right. Or not get in trouble, but you don't have the direct ability to order them to follow the advice. So you have to develop leadership skills a little differently when it's an informal leadership that's through influence, through credibility. It wasn't till later in my career when I took on leadership roles within the legal department and ultimately went to the senior leadership role at UPS where I actually managed people. And so I had to transfer those informal leadership skills into formal leadership skills. And it was challenging at first. Even though you think just telling someone, because they report to you, they'll do what you say, it's a lot harder than that. They'll shake their heads. Right. But as often as they'll follow your direction, they can also undermine what you're trying to accomplish by subtly sabotaging your goals. So even in a formal leadership roles, I had to learn to lead through influence, gain credibility, and get people to want to follow me. And I think that was probably the thing that was the hardest to learn, but helped me as much as anything else in my career.
Awesome. So you guys both mentioned, you mentioned your formal leadership and you mentioned the informal leadership. So I know many times folks in our audience will want to know, what's your secret to success? You guys both did great things throughout your entire career. What would you say were a couple successes or specific things that you think really contributed to your ability to climb the corporate ladder?
I would say two things. One, leadership style is important. And to be successful, your leadership style needs to be one that your team really gravitates to and responds to. As Teri mentioned, I can say we need to do A, B, and C, but at the end of the day, these are grown adults, and some of them are executives, and so they may have the choice to choose not to. I look to give them a reason. I say this to everyone, my leadership style needs to be one that people want to work for me, and a style that they want to deliver for me. And not everybody has that, but that's what I focus on, is kind of learning them and hopefully letting it be authentic. And so authentic leadership, I think it gives me the opportunity for folks to be able to say, you know what, I don't want to let Benita down. Because my leaders that I've had, that I've reported into, that was and who are great leaders that I modeled, that was my perspective of them. Both some men and women who were just phenomenal leaders who supported me. I never wanted to let them down. And so it's been very important for me as I've moved through the organization that with every team that I've had to ensure that my leadership was authentic, and then two, I didn't let them down. And one, that they looked at me and say, Benita, we don't want to disappoint you. We do not, and a lot of times they wouldn't even come to me with problems. They're like, we are not going to go to Benita with this until we fix it. And then I would find out afterwards. And their words were those exact words. We didn't want to let you down. We wanted you to know that we had it. So, and I think that comes from authenticity. The second piece I would say is, for me, is, how do I always separate myself from the pack? I was always putting myself in the position, oftentimes taking on jobs that nobody else wanted, and made it happen. And my boss would say, Benita, here's an opportunity. You get that tap on the shoulder. Here's an opportunity to go and do something different. And I think Teri mentioned this earlier around pivoting. And boy, probably not something that I wanted to do. But if I did it, I could add it to my whole resume, that I could check boxes that no one else in the organization could say they could check, right? I could open up an introduction and say, my name is Benita Chinn. I am the first Black female to to run a Gatorade plant, to be in both beverages and foods, run contract manufacturing. I was checking those boxes, but no one else could say that. And so it was a matter of how could I also be marketable for my own company and separate myself from all of the other senior directors, who might be sitting on our leadership team. So I would say those two things, authentic leadership, and then skills and experience that separates you from the pack.
And you said something really key about skills and experiences, because I know particularly our younger career women are looking to fast track to the next levels, right? So talk to us a little bit about, the pace and the sequencing and how you made decisions to take those next roles, and how many of them were lateral versus going straight up. I think that'll be a good perspective for our audience.
Yeah, I do think, there was I call it like a 8-year period where we were basically we were doubling one of our operations out in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a 4-line bottling plant. We were taking it to an 8-line bottling plant, hiring over 400 some people, building a service center. And we were doing it in about 3 years, which is just ridiculously rapid. But during that time, I had taken on roles as the site was growing. I took on lateral roles as an opportunity for me to learn another part of the business, because my background was engineering and operations. But I took on demand planning, which is, forecasting and for, production volume and product and sales, which was not necessarily in my area. But as the site grew, I actually chose to have those groups not only work there, but then I had them report into me. I volunteered to take on those groups. And so doing so, I turned down the opportunity to go run my own plant at that time because I felt like that experience was going to be much more beneficial for me later on in my career. And the answer to that, yes, it was, because now, what group am I spending a lot of my time with? I'm spending a lot of time with our corporate demand planning group. Okay. And that experience that I got and received back then has paid dividends for me now in understanding kind of our direct store delivery system for our overall supply chain. And then so sometimes those cross or lateral roles, it's not always about promotion. I say this to, my mentors or mentees. Everything isn't always about the promotion. Some of it along the way, your journey, you've got to pick up skills that you may say, man, I really don't like this. Mm-hmm. But 3 or 4 years later, you're going to be thankful that you obtained it. And I can say, being a maintenance supervisor, I didn't like it. But today I am driving a national team that is driving maintenance systems across our whole beverage organization. And I can talk their language. Why? Because I was a maintenance supervisor at one point in time in my career. So.
And don't you think that when you don't check those boxes, when you don't take those different assignments, that becomes the rationalization for the company not to give you the next promotion?
Exactly.
Have you seen that happen the other
definitely.
way?
They'll say, well, we think you need this experience and that experience before you take on that role.
Absolutely. Well, you guys both work for some incredibly large organizations, Fortune 50 corporations that have historically been very male-dominated, very white male-dominated, to be very specifically. So talk to us a little bit about your biggest challenges in the careers that you've had in these organizations as a female and as an African-American female. How have you navigated that?
We don't have enough time.
we need a drink to go along with this. No.
You should have had it. Yeah. Go ahead, Teri.
No, there's no doubt that I can't remember how many times I was the only one in the room, and I'm sure you've had that experience too, where you're the only one in the room. But I'll tell you, certainly being an African-American female, I believe that I got the opportunity to join UPS in the role that I did because someone, a board member, at a critical point in time said, hey, UPS, you are moving to Atlanta. It is, a very diverse city, and your corporate offices should probably look a lot more like the city in which you're operating in. And as a result of that, they looked a little farther, they cast the net, they asked a few more people, and I got the opportunity to interview. And so going into UPS, I was not only one of the few women of color, but I was an outsider because many of the individuals at the company grow up from literally the package pickup and delivery operation up through the organization.
What about you, Benita?
Yeah, I would say that someone gave me some good advice early in my career that in this STEM environment that I'm in, which is very technical and very male and white male dominated, that I'm not going to have the ability to change hundreds of years of women's history and how women are perceived in the organization. But what I can do is be an example of and representative to men of what women are capable of doing. And so I had to, put on my big girl pants in some of these meetings and suck it up and recognize that, here I am. I'm 25 years with the company this year, and I still have had experiences of someone, and it's usually a male, who, for whatever reason, doesn't have confidence in me, regardless of my track record and where I've come. Why? I don't know. But what I learned was that individual does not represent our organization. Because as women, we take it personally. And when you come across someone who doesn't have that confidence in you without any reason, and it's because you're either a female or a person of color, you have to be able to say, my boss and my boss's, manager or et cetera, if they believe in me and they have the respect and confidence in me, that's really what matters. Right. key decision makers in the organization higher up above that person, if they continue to support and sponsor me, that's what that matters. But I think sometimes as a female, I have gotten hung up on a single individual who, for whatever reason, didn't support me, and I didn't know why, and they would never give me a reason why. But I had to really kind of grow up and say that person doesn't define your career. Your career is defined by you, right, and those key decision makers, are the ones that do it. Being in a technical world, I have used some different tactics. When I first took over my first Gatorade bottling plant, it was out in Oakland, California, and this was my first time as a plant director. And I was being introduced to the team for the very first time. Now, people who see my name before they see me, which is Chinn, automatically assume that I'm Asian. Right. And this was also a facility that had not had a female plant director before. And so when I was on the plant tour, one of the employees took me on a tour, and we walked by one of our cooling tunnels, and it was down. And so one of the maintenance mechanics walked up to me. And remember, I used to be a what? Maintenance supervisor 15, 20 years before that time. But I walked up to the mechanic, and I said, "Hey, how long have you guys been down?" And they said, "Hey, you're going to be our new plant director." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, we've been down since, it's probably about 10 a.m. that morning. He says, "We've been down since last night around midnight." And he says, "The cooling tunnel belt broke." And so I asked him, I said, "So is it a single drive or dual drive shaft?" And his mouth dropped open. And I didn't have to ask that question, but I asked that question, and I actually already knew the answer to the question. But I asked the question because what do I need to do and establish as I'm taking over this site? I need to send some kind of a message that I know what the heck I'm doing, right, and I know what I'm talking about. I didn't have to, right, but I did. And I do that sometimes in meetings. I will respond with a response that gives a little bit more information, not because it needs to be said, but because I need people to know what I know and what I'm capable of doing, and that I'm qualified to be sitting at the table. So those are some strategies that I've used, especially in a very dominant, male technical environment.
I think those were some great examples, because oftentimes we can become the angry black woman in the room, right? And sometimes we're not so political what we say or how our non-verbal body language is communicating at that time. So I think that's a great example of that. So a little bit of real talk. So you will often hear other African American women say that when we get high level positions that we're not always helping and supporting one another. So I'd love to know and have you guys share how you've leveraged the positions of influence that you've had the opportunity to possess, and how you've helped other women of color that's coming along behind you.
It's incredibly important, and I've benefited so much from women who helped me that, very early on in my career, and I think at every stage, I've looked for opportunities to help other women, whether they're women inside of the organization or women outside of the organization, or participating in events like the She League. I think it's, I've had the experience, quite frankly, of, a woman who was in a senior role in an organization, and she was specifically told by others in the organization, "Hey, you need to mentor this young lady." Mm-hmm. And she was, "Oh yes, I'd be happy to, I'd love to. Oh, it's just so wonderful." And I kept waiting, and I kept waiting, and I call her, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do lunch, And I kept waiting. And to this day, we never got together. She never invited me to lunch. She was actually upset that there was another in her sphere. And that taught me a big lesson, that there's absolutely room enough for more. Yes. And quite frankly, the more you have, the more support that you have, and those echo chambers are so important when you're trying to get things done. So after experiencing that, I made it a point not to be that person, and to I tell people all the time, particularly when I was working, I'd say, look, I offer myself up at an event like this and say, I'm happy to mentor, talk to people, give you suggestion. And if there were 100 people in the room, maybe one would take the time and the opportunity to actually give me a call and say, "Hey, I'd like to get your help." So I don't think it's so much people not willing to help, but a lot of times people aren't willing to take that step and ask for the help or to seek that advice or to ask for that mentorship program. And you'd be surprised. I think more women would be willing to help. It just, if they have the opportunity and someone's reaching out to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Benita?
I'm fortunate and have been fortunate to work for, Pepsico, where we have employee resource groups, and one of our resource groups is Mosaic. Mosaic is our African American resource group, and we have a Mosaic. First of all, we have a Mosaic mentoring program. So I am one of the mentors in the Mosaic program, and it's designed to look at, African American, both men and women, at certain levels in the organization, and to mentor them for those next opportunities. Now, everyone is not qualified to be a mentor, so let's make sure that we're clear on that, because so you can't just go and say, hey, we need people to sign up to be mentors.
Right.
It is a pretty important role, and there's some responsibilities, and as Teri mentioned, some people just either don't embrace it or they just don't know quite how to do it. I get a lot out of being a mentor. I tell my mentees that. I was mentoring a young lady who was in IT, which was not my area of expertise. So even though I was mentoring her, I was learning a lot about IT. And now I have a digital value chain team that reports into me that is doing a lot of technology and IT upgrade. But I wouldn't know as much as I know about clouds and infrastructure or whatnot if my mentee hadn't given me some of that perspective. And so I think that's the key area for me. Another area is I felt like we were not recruiting or capturing a lot of people of color, and particularly African American females, through our internship and campus recruiting program. So I always say, people be the change you want to see. Right. So I joined I raised my hands like, hey, can I get on your campus recruiting committee? And what I have been doing is speaking at some of the schools that we travel to. I connect with the fraternities and sororities, and particularly some of the African American, because what I found in our African American community, oftentimes a lot of the students are, first generation college students. And so there's no one in their circle that is giving them the right kind of guidance and advice about how to navigate preparing for an internship, or, who's looking at your resume? Right. Because when I look at their resume, that's like, good gracious, no one's giving them any feedback. And so in addition to being as part of that, campus recruiting committee, I spend time really giving some sessions on building a power resume. And I say, even whether you choose to come with Pepsi or not, at the end of the day, you'll have something that you can go take to other corporations. And then I also spend, a lot of time teaching women, especially our women of color, but just women in general, about, someone mentioned it earlier, building relationships and how that's so important to networking. And I think that, for me, and then I've just, in the past probably 7-8 years of my career, I've just started to really get into the community part of it, of how we can have more of an impact from our community perspective. So.
Awesome. Well, ladies, I have definitely enjoyed our conversation on leadership and legacy, and I hope you listening to us virtually have enjoyed it as well. Thank you to Benita, Chinn, and thank you again